تصل هذه الفئات المستضعفة إلى المعلومات، وفيما إذا كانوا يثقون بوسائل الإعلام التقليدية، وأيضا مدى استخدامهم للإعلام الاجتماعي. وأيضا حاولنا أن نعرف ما هي التطبيقات التي يستخدمونها وما هو دور رجال الدين في ذلك. الهدف كان هو كيف نتمكن من توفير التي تساعد في توفير المعلومات الصح بحيث يكون هؤلاء الأشخاص ضحايا للإعلام المضلل، ولا نتأكد بألا يتم إخفاء هذه الشريحة. وعلى الجانب الآخر كنا نريد أن نتأكد من أن أصوات هؤلاء الناس أو الجهات المتواضعة سيتم إسماعهم من خلال الإعلاميين ومن خلال ال NGOs، ففهم احتياجاتهم وتحدياتهم هي الخطوة الأولى تتفاعل هذه الجهات والمجتمعات المحلية. ننظر بالتابع إلى الأردن حاليا. هذا من اتفاقيات التجارية. طبعا هذا بالنسبة للاجئين يبدو أن الوضع رائع، وحتى بالنسبة للاقتصاد الأردني الوضع رائع، أو هذه الامتيازات رائعة، فإن ذلك سيمكن الاقتصاد من النمو، حيث تكون هنالك تجارة أعلى وإمكانية الوصول إلى الاتحاد الأوروبي بتعرفة قليلة، وسيتم تشغيل اللاجئين. ولكن هل اللاجئين يعرفوا كيف يستغلوا هذا الميثاق أو هذه الامتيازات؟ هل نعرف ما هي مهارات السوريين وهل تناسب احتياجات سوق العمل الأردني؟ وهنالك مثال آخر من وسط آسيا، ولكن سأحاول أن أختم هنا في عدة نقاط. الاحتياجات الحقيقية للاجئين والمجتمعات المضيفة يجب دائما أن تؤخذ بعين الاعتبار، وأيضا قبل تبني الاتفاقيات الدولية يجب أن يتم تحليل الواقع لتحديد ما هي الحواجز الاقتصادية لنتمكن من إعطاء الفائدة للاجئين والمجتمعات المضيفة. هذه الاتفاقيات التي تمنح التي أو مؤسسات المجتمع المدني. وكيف نحقق ذلك؟ يمكن أن نحقق ذلك من خلال تشجيع ودعم الأبحاث المدعومة على الأدلة، ومن خلال الوصول إلى معلومات موثوقة، ولأن تدفق المعلومات دون عوائق لجميع الأطراف ذات العلاقة في تحقيق أهدافنا. فيما يتعلق بالمنظمات، وأن كان الشخص مسؤولا أو طرفا ذات علاقة، فإن ذلك يؤدي إلى إشراك اللاجئين والمجتمعات، وأيضا سنحد من التهميش والإقصاء، وأيضا سنتجنب وجود سوق سوداء، وأيضا سنتجنب الراديكالية وخاصة للشباب. شكرا جزيلا على استماعكم. شكرا. Thank you so much for your presentation. And now we start the session entitled The Role of National Institutions in Supporting Refugees in the Area of Education and Social Protection. We know that education is a basic human right, and it might be the obsession for any refugee. So education is an obsession for any refugee, and Jordan granted this right. And the Education Ministry, along its partners including UNICEF and the UNHCR and UNESCO, opened schools in camps in order to absorb or to take in more refugee children. And we have also the afternoon shift schools. And Jordan might be among the few countries in the world who cared for higher education as well. And Jordan provided scholarships for distinguished refugee students, and they managed to enter the university, to enroll in Jordanian universities for free. And we're pleased to have among us an elite group of scholars and researchers and academics who will discuss this. And we start with Dr. Anas Al-Subuh. Dr. Anas is an associate professor at Yarmouk University from the IT section. He conducted several research papers and he participated in many conferences. In his paper, he will review the consecutive waves of refuge and displacement and migration into Jordan over the last 100 years. So we give him the floor. Please be upon him. And then I'm pleased to extend my thanks to the organizers. And I'm pleased to speak about the Refugees Studies Department at Yarmouk University. And it's one of the important departments that does research on refugees. First, we need to review the impact of refugees, which has went on for a long time. Jordan has been receiving waves of refugees since its establishment. We have 57 nationalities. 13% of the populations of refugees, or 31, they make 31% of the total population in Jordan. First, we had an influx of Palestinian refugees at the time of the founding king. Then we received the second influx of Palestinian refugees during the 1967 war. Back then, we received around 350,000 refugees during the reign of King Hussein. And then we received the third wave during the reign of King Abdullah. And we received 300,000 refugees in 2015 based on the census that was conducted in 2015, but this number has doubled or tripled or even more. 1 in 3 people living in Jordan is a refugee, and this is a huge number per capita. We have 2 million registered Palestinian refugees who are full citizens, and we have more than 130,000 Iraqis. Egyptians, we have 600,000 Egyptian Egyptians living among us, and we have more and more Syrian refugees, and we have more than 700,000 registered Syrian refugees since the start of Sudan, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and Somalia. These statistics, these are not numbers. These numbers leave an impact on Jordan. That's why we need to review our future plans in Jordan. These consecutive waves have led to widening the gap between services offered to refugees compared to services offered to locals, especially that we're talking about finding sustainable solutions to these crises. And Jordan, at the beginning, used to work on an ad hoc basis. However, now with the Syrian crisis, Jordan has drawn from its past experiences to deal with the sudden need of having to set up camps and talk to or contact NGOs and the international community to help with this effort. During the influx of the Palestinian refugees, camps were set up, and we did not have a pre-plan. We have not pre-planned for this. For example, Al-Baqa camp was set up on an area which had groundwater. However, now the situation is not the same, and Al-Baqa camp was set up on a fertile ground as well, where there is lots of groundwater. However, at the time of the Iraqi influx, when we had 170,000 refugees who moved to Jordan, this caused tremendous pressures on infrastructure and led to a dramatic increase in prices, in addition to the absence of aid from donor countries to Jordan. Then we had the Libyan crisis, which did not find much echo. However, Jordan had to pay the biggest price, especially when it comes to Jordanian hospitals. 40 out of 60 hospitals in Jordan received the Libyan patients, but until now, not all bills have been settled, which put additional pressure on the health sector in Jordan. This was followed by the Yemeni refugees, where we received no help whatsoever, and there is an estimated 27,000 Yemenis who also put pressure on the labor market and on the infrastructure in general. The largest influx over the last 10 years, which Jordan continues to suffer from, and where refugees spread across the governorates, is the Syrian influx. And we know that Erbil is the biggest host community in Jordan to the Syrians. 46% of children between 0 to 17 are children. Elderly make up 4.7% of the Syrian refugees, against 46% against children under 17 who who make up 46% of the total Syrian refugee population in Jordan. This affects all the sectors in Jordan, and many are not aware of these figures. We have between 1.3 million and 1.4 million Syrians in Jordan, but the registered are around 700. So we're talking about another 600,000 Syrians who are not registered. Who's responsible for those unregistered Syrians, and where do they get assistance from? And what's the impact of those unregistered Syrians on the educational sector? We have no information about these refugees who live in Jordan because of the absence of support to setting up a system to follow up on these Syrians. And we have Syrians coming formally and others informally. Some of these refugees enter Jordan with a student visa, but they do not study in Jordan. So who pays for the cost of all this? You have 1 more minute. In the last minute given to me, I want to point to a recent study conducted by the center, which shows given that we don't have permanent solutions, 18% effect on the economic sector was 18%, 21% for the education sector, and 20% for politics, which means that we still have problems in all sectors, and we have not provided permanent solutions to these sectors that were affected. And I have a breakdown of the sector, including the economic sector, education, health sectors, political sector, etc. It was the schools who were badly hit because we lack teachers, and we are short of funding for these schools, and many schools run on 2 shifts. We have also the health consequences, especially after COVID-19. And as Morel said, we don't have a legislative framework for refugees, not in Jordan, not in Europe. And we have more extremism, more crimes, and we have sleeping cells. This leads to more such problems because of the extra burdens. There are a number of proposed solutions that we need to look for, but we should be talking about sustainable and long-term solutions that will benefit the local community and the Jordanian community, and with special focus on entrepreneurship. And we need also psychosocial support in the area of education, and all donor countries should continue to support Jordan because we get 31% of the required assistance for each sector, and this is a very small percentage. And based on the recent response plan, Jordan only received 22% of the requested amount from donor countries. That's based on the response plan for 2020-22. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anas, for what you presented. You gave a good historical development of the waves of refugees and displacement over the past 100 years, and the big role played, continues to be played by Jordan towards the survivors. Now, we have a dear colleague, Dr. Khalida Massawa, and she will present to us an experience on the Theodorian School in receiving student refugees. Dr. has a PhD in administrative development, and she is the head of the school, the Theodore Schneller School. She is the headmaster. She has a lot of experience in the field of education. We welcome her warmly, and the floor is yours now. Please go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the university, and thank you for this distinct action and work, and please bear with me. We need to talk about practical experiences in order to learn from these practical experiences, especially when we talk about people leaving their homeland. Economic disasters, psychological disasters, etc. that happen to people. So, a person, all of a sudden, a person's life changes all of a sudden. It is a very hard, difficult, and long experience. And at the same time, you have a country that receives thousands upon thousands of people. The meanings of humanity, of courage, from the state and from the people alike. At the Theodore Schneller School, we are an institution, a Danish institution. It was built by the Germans in 1969, and their slogan was, at the time, a home for people who had no home. It was for marginalized people, for orphans, and children who had familial problems. It is in eastern Amman. It is called Schneller. It was beside the Schneller camp, because the Schneller camp would provide services there too and provide water to the school. The school has always received refugees, and all of its students from the beginning were Palestinian refugees. And then we started to have Iraqi students and Syrian students as well, and even Yemeni students, some Yemeni students. The refugee students were suffering from many problems, psychological problems, economic, and the psychological problems were significant. They were suffering from anxiety and depression, and they were suffering from aggression as well. We used to document cases of aggression amongst the students. The school was prepared with programs because the school tried to minimize the individual differences between the students, and the school has worked hard to integrate students together, the refugee students from various nationalities and various religions within the school community. At the school, during the Iraqi asylum, there was a lot of pressure on the school and instability in the school because it was like a transit area. The students would come for 6 months or a year, and Australia or elsewhere. So we needed to keep in mind the feelings of pain that would affect the faculty at the school as well. Because we would see students would come to us and then they would leave us and not come back again. So this had an impact. Now the services that we provide included at a certain point in time the service of shelter. So we have 250 students almost, 70 students sleep at the school. They eat and sleep at the school, and we provide them with services as well. During periods of asylum, we would have more students coming to the school, and we would rely on charity from our partners as well. This would affect the budget of the school and the salaries of the teachers. Sometimes we would reach full capacity in classrooms. In classrooms that would only fit 28 students, sometimes we would accept 36 students. And so we also have large electricity bills, 7,000 to 8,000 kVs a month. This is a challenge for us. And we put a program in place for a solar system, any electricity charges. So we transformed this into an opportunity. We also created a counseling department for the students, and this, of course, increased our costs. We provided numerous programs for integrating refugee students, and we got trained by Germans in this regard in areas such as interactive theater, sports, soccer, football. Many programs for psychological support. We also utilize the services of a psychiatrist and psychological experts so that they could help us in solving the problems of students. Also, the most important problem that we used to face was the fact that there are no identity papers for several students and faculty. So for the faculty, there were teachers who we could not employ their services. The same thing applied to student families, and we would employ them at the school in the sense that we wouldn't give them a salary, but we would give them pocket money and feed them and shelter them because we wanted to assist them. There was some and we went and took that person and funeral and so on. In this study, we had 38 students from 2016 to 2021, and we monitored what problems they had. The school embraced these refugees who were suffering from psychological issues, social issues, and economic issues, and legal problems as well. Yet, despite this, we undertook our duty. The school now, the vast majority of the students are refugees. From the governors, maybe we only have 15 students in total. But besides that, all of the students are refugees. I will not speak too much more because I already talked about the major problems that we suffered from and the problems that the students suffered from and some of the programs that we presented to them. Now, the administrative and academic problems exist not only at our school, but at many schools throughout the country. Now, our teachers would also teach people formally and informally, so almost on a voluntary basis. So there would be some salary, but there would be physical exhaustion for the teachers in this regard. So thank you for listening. Thank you very much, Dr. Seidel, for your presentation. on this very important, unique experience, actually, at the Theodore School. Actually, you are a live model, a shining example on presenting education, providing education to refugees in Jordan. So thank you so much for this. We will continue now and listen to other researchers who we are very happy to host here, and the Petra University is happy to host. The speech now, or the words now, will be for Dr. Hanafi al-Hindawi. Dr. Hanafi has a PhD in Islamic History and Civilization from the Jordanian University. She has numerous articles published in academic journals. She participated in various international conferences and local conferences as well. Dr. Hanafi will discuss the role of the Ministry of Education in supporting primary education for student refugees, Syrian student refugees in Jordan. Now, you forgot to mention something in my CV, which is I am a headmaster of a school. And so I'm talking about my practical experience as well. Thank you so much. In the name of God, and prayers be on the Prophet Muhammad. I am the headmaster of a school affiliated with the Ministry of Education. It is the Maimuna bin Khalid School in England. And I will speak about a practical experience regarding the role of the Ministry of Education in supporting Syrian refugee students. Like any Jordanian, I say that that education is a right for all, whatever your nationality. And as the Ministry of Education, we support education. We support this right for Syrian refugees as well. Now, the Ministry of Education opens schools in camps and opens the doors of public schools as well, and there's also schools with two shifts, morning shifts and evening shifts. And I am a headmaster at a school which has more than one shift as well. And I'm talking about my practical experience here. And I can tell you what the role was of the Ministry of Education to support Syrian students. There are two types of education provided by the ministry: the formal education and informal education. This included public schools and included schools in camps and the two-shift schools. As for the informal education, it was focused on the following: cognitive education centers, and also trying to support dropouts or combat dropouts as well, the phenomenon of dropouts. And I will talk about, I talked about the types of education available in Jordan, the obstacles facing them, and the psychological effects on Syrian students. And I will talk about the types of education, particularly in Jordan, and the challenges and obstacles facing Syrian refugee students. When it comes to cognitive education, now complementary education is given to Syrian refugees between 9 to 12 years old. It is also for students who have been disrupted from their education. And in this complementary education, we focus on basic skills such as Arabic language, math, science. We polish these basic skills, and we try in 3 years from grade 1, or in a few years from grade 1 to grade 6, we try to let the students catch up. So the Ministry of Education gives the students who were disrupted from education to catch up once again with their colleagues. And if we have a student from 9 to 12 years old, then this student goes through grade 1, then grade 2, etc. This means that in the first semester, we give them certain materials, and then in the second semester, we give them more materials until they arrive at grade 6. As for the other kind of education, informal education, here I'm talking about the issue of dropout. This is based on the age of the person. Now here we have the age group of 13 to 18 for males and 13 to 20 for females. And this goes on for 24 months, this other type of education. This education encourages not to drop out, and it encourages them to get their opportunity in education. What are the positives of this compensatory education center? First of all, we address the problem of dropouts. We encourage them to integrate with their colleagues in studying as well. I talked about informal education. We have over 100 centers for compensatory education. And we also have evening centers as well to address the issue of dropout. But as a master of a school, I face challenges and problems, which we do not deny. And we do not deny that the local community resisted the two-shift system for Jordanians and Syrians. But thank God, now we have 40 minutes for each class in the morning and 40 minutes for each class in the evening. And also, in the evening centers, we have also employment opportunities for the educators, people who do not find work. So Dr. Petra was talking about teachers who are working day and night, but here we have evening centers where teachers work exclusively. So they don't have to work in the morning and at night, or in the evening rather. So what we do is we have the main teacher in the morning session or in the morning shift. What are the obstacles that we are facing? Actually, in education, despite the pressures on public schools, despite the pressure, thank God, we are able to face this. We do have evening sessions, so we do not have overcrowdedness in the morning. There are psychological, social circumstances, economic circumstances that surround the student. Sometimes students are absent due to economic reasons or due to the cost of transportation to come to school. Sometimes the students are shy or embarrassed. So, for example, the person would be 10 years old and still in grade 1, and that person's colleagues are already in a higher grade. So these grades or these classes might embarrass the student. I mentioned the transportation costs and poverty. These also represent a problem in education. There is also the problems of early marriage. Especially amongst females. There are also problems relating to conditions for registration. For a student to register, documents are required, and sometimes not all Syrian students have these documents, or these documents are from Syria, and this causes a problem. This can be an obstacle for the student or registering the student in the school. Child labor is another problem. How much more time do I have? 1 minute, okay. At the compensatory center, we had 16 students, and they were illiterate, basically. But we were able to overcome this with the efforts of the teachers, and we paid for their transportation costs to come to the center, and we tried to provide them with stationery and so on. In the results, I noted that the Ministry of Education was keen to provide education to all Syrian students in all educational phases. And Syrian students in Jordan can obtain education through the compensatory education centers or by joining the public schools as well. Syrian students suffer from some behavioral problems at the schools, and if there is a lack of cooperation between us and the parents, this is difficult for us as a faculty. We need to have certain systems for registration that allow students to join education here. And we need to address the issue of time frames in education. And we also need to have training programs for teachers and how to deal with psychological and behavioral problems among students. I apologize if I took too long. Thank you, Dr. Hanadi. We are proud of you as a headmaster, and you really highlighted the role of the Ministry of Education in supporting Syrian students. We move on now to Dr. Hansen Maika. We are happy to have him with us. He will talk to us about the economic and social risks emanating from the situation of asylum. He is a researcher, an academic, and he has a PhD in sociology and criminology from Petra with distinction. He has published numerous studies and books in sociology and criminology in relation to asylum, violence, extremism. And he is very concerned with contemporary social issues and psychosocial support. The floor is yours, sir. Please go ahead. Thank you. Peace be upon you. I thank Petra University for allowing me to participate in this conference. My paper is co-authored by me and Dr. Rashid, and we looked at the economic and social risks in asylum. In our study, we focused on the Syrian crisis particularly. Why? Because from 2014 to 2018, the rates of asylum from Syria to Jordan were 1.6 million refugees. So this number is huge at the level of Jordan. As for our study, as you can see in the PowerPoint, I tried to summarize, but we divided it into a number of axes or themes. So we have the introduction, the problem of the study, the goals behind the study, and the results. As for the introduction, we know that asylum is a global threat or risk, Arab countries and foreign countries alike. Also, the rise of asylum rates in Arab countries came about as a result of internal conflict in these countries. Therefore, there is a vacuum in the countries And people in these countries begin to flee because of lack of security and stability and safety.
Also, at the local level, we had socioeconomic problems, and the problems are not restricted to socioeconomic problems. But rather, we should talk about a number of problems that are interlinked. In Jordan, they have a high cost of living, and socially, they have social pressures, including poverty and unemployment and other problems. To be brief, as we said, the problem that coordinated to Islam is that the influx of refugees led to huge challenges and the pressures on infrastructure, which led to more burdens. And this requires the aid provided by the international community. The aid presented by the international community was not insufficient, and although the country dealt professionally with the refugee crisis, and we managed the situation professionally, and we set up new departments and units and teams and committed to deal with this crisis across all governorates. I and Dr. Raja conducted this study. Dr. Raja has a degree in history, and the idea behind conducting this research is to identify the economic problems resulting from refugees. The importance of this study is that it provides official information and it informs decision makers on taking decisions, inform them when they take decisions related to the problems of refugees. Refugees are defined as people fleeing their countries because they are under threat or because of other situations. And some refugees are fleeing trauma, or refugees flee because of exceptional circumstances that threaten the very existence of people. When we say refuge, people take refuge in safe places or to safe places. The key findings is as follows. Given the conflict in different countries, most refugees in Jordan between 2014 and 2018 were Syrians. They had exactly somewhere moved to other areas, released from camps subject to certain conditions. Syrian workers are in high demand and they are paid lower than local workers. And this led to an impact on the density of populations and crowdedness, and it affected the income of families. The education and health and other sectors were affected. we have interlinked problems, including economic problems, social problems, health problems, infrastructure stream, and there were pressures on schools, and this led to crowdedness inside the classrooms. Another study showed that 65% of refugees have an impact on the political situation in Jordan, and 70% affect the social life in Jordan, and 75% of refugees have environmental impact on Jordan. And given their culture, they need to be integrated into the Jordanian culture. And in addition to the Syrian refugees, we have other refugees from Yemen and previously from Palestine. So Jordan is a safe haven given its strategic location. Among the recommendations is conducting more studies on the risks of the impact of refugees who come from countries that are in conflict. We know that also tourism was affected because of the impact of refugees. Tourism in Jordan between 2014 and 2018, tourism was hit. The other recommendation is to provide therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists to provide psychosocial support to refugees. And a third recommendation is starting productive projects for refugees instead of them relying on assistance from donor organizations. This is one reason why unemployment went up in Jordan. Among the security and political problems are towards these political and security problems. We should create conditions on those who work in these projects. And the refugees should be active in the communities where they live. Thank you for presenting the socioeconomic problems resulting from refugees, and which we all know about. And we move to the researcher, Dr. Arbel Fashran, who will speak about the role of official institutions in taking care of refugees. And Arbel Fashran is an employee at the Ministry of Interior Affairs of Interior, and she has participated in some studies, and she's a member in many charities. We welcome her to this session, and we'll speak about the role of the Ministry of Interior. Peace be upon Prophet Muhammad. Thank the organizers of this conference, specifically Dr. Marwan al-Moura. Thanks also to Dr. Yasin Amman, who gave us the opportunity to meet you I'll speak about the role of official institutions in dealing with refugees, and I'll speak about the Ministry of Interior as an example or as a model. No one can imagine the huge role, the big role that the Ministry of Interior has undertook to deal with the burden, the security burden, the economic burden, and all burdens that we have to shoulder. I was given 10 minutes to speak. I will be brief. I don't want to delve into the details. I just want to highlight key points that we should take into account. We should be aware of the role taken by adopted by the Ministry of the Interior. We know that there are security issues, concerns related to refugees, and this threatens the security and stability of communities. We know that we're receiving more and more refugees who seek to have a better life. The Syrian refugees are or represent a humanitarian crisis, and the Syrian crisis has affected the whole region and all communities. As for the role of the Ministry of Interior, our security role is being exercised by the Public Security Department, and the governors, local governors are also in charge or help us at border points. We deal with thousands of refugees. And the influx of refugees came at a time when we suffered from structural problems, and we had other refugees from Yemen, Libya, and Iraq, and other countries. We were already suffering from economic and social problems. Still, we received this huge number of refugees. And we have to do our humanitarian role. The Syrian crisis is a continuous crisis, and all indicators point out that the return of Syrians to their country is not expected in the near future. Like the many problems that these refugees are suffering from. And we have barriers to their return. And the main reason is that the compulsory drafting in Syria, whereby all males up to the age of 42 have to be recruited by the Syrian military. And so aside from our security responsibilities in the Ministry of Interior, we undertake a humanitarian role. And the local governments try to help the Syrians to receive shelter and basic services, especially at that point. and there were a number of scientific studies who speak about this. And with regards, which speaks about, and these papers speak about the psychosocial impact of Roma on refugee children, Syrian refugee children. With, Syrian refugee children were sampled and were taken as a sample, and study concluded that Syrian children were affected by the crisis. Excluding the value. So we spoke about the crisis already. I have tables that show the refugees who under Jordan illegally, and at the beginning of the crisis, so you see 2,000 refugees only. Back to the statistics of the UNHCR, we find out that as of 2011, we realized that we have 1 million Syrian refugees in Jordan. And the breakdown of these refugees, and we conducted an opinion study also about the economic situation of these refugees. And according to the UNHCR, refugees are distributed among citizens governorates. In a military camp, we have the largest number of citizens. As for the legal role, and we have experts with us in the legal field, we need to point that the Ministry of Interior undertakes a political and legal role or legal responsibility towards them. And the ministry applies the necessary policies. And we, from a legal perspective, Jordan has not signed any agreement related to Syrian refugees or related to refugees in general, or its protocols, and we are not signatory to any agreement on refugees regionally. And we don't have agreements in this field regionally. We spoke extensively about this. I have 1 more minute only to finish, so I'll jump to the conclusions, or to the recommendations, sorry. First, the Ministry of Interior should work on returning the Syrians to safe areas within their country once the conflict comes to an end. Because of the pressure they are putting on Jordan. Second, the Ministry of Interior should enhance the role of the Jordanian media on combating terrorism and the need to communicate with all segments and which promotes the role of Islam. Also, we need to have reforms promoting political reforms whereby everyone has a voice, and whereby we have more political participation in order to combat terrorism and extremism.
Thank you, doctors, for your presentation. And now we will listen to Dr. Abdullah from Petra, and he will talk to us about the political ramifications of Syrian refugees. He is the head of media and strategic studies at Al University, and he is a pioneer of the concept of intellectual security. Dr. Hassan will be presenting his paper, and as you mentioned, the 10 minutes, please. I thought you were going to give me 15 minutes. Okay, 10 minutes. I had about 10 questions or issues in the paper, but I will summarize this one issue with 10 branches, let's say. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and I would like to thank the University of Petra and the organizers of this conference, and Dr. Qasim and Ahmed. And 10 minutes is difficult to summarize everything in the paper, but I will mention a few points, major points in the paper, including the definition of the refugee. This refugee is in paragraph 2A of the 1961 Convention, and it included a number of requirements or conditions. First of all, the person needs to be fearful. The oppression or the oppression may exist because of the person's origin or race or religious or social group. The person needs to be outside the country to be defined as a refugee, and the person also would have that would be fearful of going back to the country of origin as well. When it comes to our Syrian brethren, we emphasize with them and sympathize with them, especially those who are displaced as well inside of Syria. There is 6 million plus displaced persons inside Syria, but these people are not considered refugees because they are still inside their original country. But those who left their country, so about 7 million, these people are considered as refugees. They are distributed in many countries, in Jordan and elsewhere, almost 1.5 million in Jordan. And there are some who are registered officially as refugees, and some who are not registered as officially as refugees. Shia in Lebanon are also worried about the demographic change there as well, and especially if there is a referendum once again. And this would influence the power of each one of the sects on the Lebanese political system, because you know that the Lebanese political system is divided between Muslims, Sunnis, Shia, and Christians as well. And the government is headed by Sunnis in Lebanon, the parliament is headed by a Shia, and the presidency itself is by a Christian. Nobody wants to disrupt this balance of power, but there are people who are worried about the increase of Sunnis in Lebanon. Now, there are Lebanese anxieties and concerns, and there has been discrimination against Syrians in Lebanon. And there are some justified fears in Lebanon, and the head of the World Bank said in 2019 that he recommends the absorption of refugees, and he mentions by name the Syrian refugees. Also, the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in 2016 called upon host countries to resettle Syrian refugees in upcoming years and trying to find new legal means and methods to settle them or regroup families once again with each other. Now, the areas where refugees work, there should be easy facilitation or transfer of products from these places to the USA and elsewhere. There was a report which said that refugees need to be settled, have their affairs settled legally, or nationalized, actually, or getting a nationality, rather. These are some of the concerns and fears that the Lebanese have. Also, there is something else. Doug Ewing, the UN spokesperson, said that Article 92 of the UN Secretary General's report talks about the granting of citizenship or nationality to refugees. There is also the concern that terrorist attacks have been taking place by people who intervene in refugees, and now there is also a discussion of not allowing or not forcing, of course, not coercing refugees to go back to their original country. Now, there are a number of basic issues. Why is Jordan or Lebanon afraid of the issue of refugees? Well, Jordan and Lebanon are worried about the Hezbollah militias, and also not knowing the political tendencies or even sex of many of refugees. So, I studied at and there were things he was so about, and there were times when he did not know that if I accidentally so you do not know the intentions of certain people. Also, Jordan is worried about the existence or arrival of extremist terrorist groups on its territory. There is also concern about peaceful coexistence and the jeopardizing of peaceful coexistence in Lebanon. There is a fear in Lebanon of settlement of refugees. One recommendation can be the creation of alliance, an Arab alliance, to face the Shia militias or the Hezbollah militias in Lebanon and elsewhere, and also working on resettling Syrian refugees back to their home countries. There is something else, which is this. Can we benefit from Syrian refugees in the Zaatari camp and the other camps? I think that if we think outside the box, Syria really was a pioneer in transformative industries, and those who were displaced are skilled workers. So we can benefit from their skills and their existence herein, and they can contribute to the economy. So we can create smart cities where refugees can be employed, and we can also provide residences and accommodation for them and provide places for them to employ their skills, and then eventually we can benefit in Jordan from the transformative industries as well. So then the productivity in Jordan will be better. So thank you very much for listening. At the end of this session, we were happy to listen to all of our dear researchers, and for the time remaining, maybe we can provide a space for a few questions, one or two questions. One or two questions for 5 minutes only, and please use the microphone. Thank you to all of the speakers and the papers that they presented. We listened to 8 studies and 8 papers, and of course, this is a lot to absorb in such a short period of time, so maybe next time we could have either more time or less papers, because we need to keep this in mind, the time limitation for next time. In regards to Dr. Hassan and his research paper, we always benefit from his ideas. One of the speakers was providing recommendations to the Ministry of Interior, but she is a part of the Interior Ministry. So there is also the Turkish solution, which is the safe spaces that they created. So by the risk management methodology, this can be created here as well, safe spaces, I'm saying. So this can be done at the borders. And my name is Dr. Ali Mahmoud. Okay, last question, please go ahead. Thank you. I will get directly to the question. My question is to Andreas or Samuel. When it comes to the World Food Program, I know this is supported by the EU, but I see that there is a decrease in support to Syrian refugees through the food program. By the lower budgets now, or something like this. Why is the food program no longer supported properly? Also, are there standards to select Syrian refugees who immigrate to Europe? If there are standards, how is it done? Is it done by lottery or what? And there was also another paper that talked about 700,000 refugees who are not registered, Syrian refugees who are not registered. I think they entered Jordan before. I think they came from Amman. So I think this is the reason, unless Anas has a different answer for this. Thank you. David, would you like to go ahead and tackle the next question? Was in regards to a food program in Jordan. According to my information, most of the support is done by the EU. And by following the food program, the assistance is only 20% in relation to the number of refugees. So this decrease in providing assistance, does it have financial dimensions, political dimensions, or what? This is the first question. The second question is the migration of refugees to Europe, to the EU. We know that they are selected through the EU. Are they selected according to certain standards? If so, what are these standards? Or are these taking place based on random lottery, for example? شكرا لهذا السؤال ولأنك كررت السؤال آخذا على هذا. بالنسبة للسؤال لا أعرف بالضبط من ناحية أداء برنامج الغذاء والمساعدات الأخرى التي ترسل للجنة بالنسبة للاجئين. لا أعرف كيف يتم احتساب كمية الدعم والمساعدة. سأعطيك مثال. في دنمارك حيث أعيش بناء على التقارير الموجودة على الأرض من مجلس اللاجئين من مجلس اللاجئين الدنماركي إلى آخره، قد يقولوا أن وضعهم استقر الآن ويمكننا أن نرسلهم أو نعيدهم إلى أوطانهم. بناء على أي أساس يقولوا هذا؟ لا أعرف من الذي يقوم بالاحتسابات ومن الذي يقوم باحتساب الأرقام. وبينما بقى الانتيار لديهم حوالي 670,000 لاجئ مستشفى في الأردن. هل هذا هو الرقم الصحيح أم لا؟ هل هذا هو الرقم الصحيح أم لا؟ هذا هو سؤال. هل لدينا الأرقام الدقيقة أم لا؟ إذا كانت هذه المنظمة ليست لديها الأرقام الفعلية الدقيقة، فكيف يمكننا أن نعتمد على المنظمة التي قررت أن تنهي المساعدات الغذائية؟ بالنسبة للمعايير المختارة للأشخاص الذين يذهبون إلى أوروبا، لا أعرف بصراحة كيف أجيب على هذا السؤال. لا أعرف ما هي المعايير. Okay, so thank you. And due to some time constraints, we will finish this session. Thank you very much for attending this session. Thank you. Let me just say this. We want to go have a break for 10 minutes and then come back to the final session. And this way we can finish early today and you can go home. So we will come back in 10 minutes and then after the final session we will have lunch. So after lunch we will